Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about the text tool and typography. First thing you need to know is where your text tool is. It's on the left-hand side in your toolbar, and it's a capital letter T. If I select the text tool, I have a few different options. I can click and drag with my text tool to create a text box that I can begin to type in, or I can click anywhere on my screen. Let's tell Photoshop I'm done with that by clicking the check mark. Or I can click anywhere in my screen and text on a horizontal line. I can also, if I click and hold down my text tool, type on a vertical line. So I have lots of different options when it comes to the text tool. I want to show you that every time I used the text tool, Photoshop automatically created a new layer. So you can see that here's the first layer, the second layer, and the third layer. I do have the ability, once I take my move tool again, to move my text around my canvas. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete these 3 layers. When I use the text tool, let me type, hi everyone, again. I have the availability to edit my text. And I can do that by having the text tool selected, clicking and dragging, and selecting the actual words on that layer. From here, I can go to my options bar. Remember that you have to have the text tool selected in order to get these options. I can change the direction of my text. I can change it from horizontal to vertical. I can change the font. I can change if I want it to be bold, italic, and so forth. And I can change the size. One thing I love, one trick about changing the size, is you can hover over this area right here and you get 2 little arrows pointing out to either side. And you can click and drag, and that's a great way to change the size, as opposed to having to go in and find a number or type a number in, although you can do that as well. I can also change the color. So if I click right here, I get the same color picker that I had before. I can change the orientation within the paragraph or within the text box. And when I'm finished editing my text, I want to hit this little check mark to let Photoshop know that I'm done. There are a couple of things about editing text that are important to know about editing your font. When I work in Microsoft Word or Google Docs, I only have so much control. I can change the size, I can change the font, I can change the orientation of the text, but in Photoshop we have way more control, which is amazing. So I'm going to show you what leading, tracking, and kerning are. We're going to go over 2 different kinds of fonts, one called a serif and one called a sans serif. We're going to look at how to type on a path and how to use word to text. So here we go. I wrote Upper Darby High School under an example of leading. So leading allows you to change and manipulate the space between lines of text. And that's why when I wrote Upper Darby High School, I made sure that Upper Darby was on one line and high school was on the other. If I take my text tool and highlight this text again, I can go to Window, Character, and I have a whole new list of options of ways that I can manipulate the text. The option for leading, again, I can do the font, the style, the size, but leading is over here on the right. It looks like an A sitting on top of another letter A. And as I said, leading allows you to change the spacing between lines of font. So I can make that spacing really big. You notice that Upper Darby is way above high school, or I can make that spacing really small. And you'll see here that they're almost overlapping where I can't even read either line of text. So let me highlight that again. I can hover over the two little A's and click and drag, which is one of my favorite ways to manipulate the leading. This is really important and comes into handy, especially when you don't want all your text to be spaced the same way in your document. And I'm going to press the check mark when I'm finished. Tracking changes the spacing between characters, selected characters. So I'm going to select the word upper. You'll notice that tracking is right underneath where leading is. It has a V and an A and two arrows pointing in either direction. I can manipulate the tracking so that the characters are closer together or that they're farther apart or spaced farther apart. They can be really far apart from each other or they can be on top of each other. Again, this comes really handy when you're manipulating certain text or fonts. The last manipulation I'm going to show you, I'm going to press the check mark, is kerning. Kerning changes the space between two characters. So I'm going to put my cursor between two characters. I want the word up, or the letters UP, to be separate from the letters PER. So I'm going to put my cursor between these two P's. My kerning is on the left-hand side. You'll see that it's a V/A with an arrow just pointing one direction. And again, I can change it to make those two letters really close together or really far apart. And I can use this trick of hovering over and moving the mouse to the right, really far apart, or really close together. They're actually on top of each other right now. All right, let's talk a little bit about fonts. There are two major font families to learn. One is a serif font, and the other is called a sans serif font. A serif font is a letter or character that has little extra fancy feet to it. I'm going to type the word serif here to show you. And I'm going to use my brush tool to explain what I'm talking about. The areas that specifically I'm talking about are on the edges of the word or the letters, characters itself. They are these little fancy, see these little areas that I'm highlighting? That makes this font a serif font. These little fancies. A sans serif font doesn't have those little feet. Sans is a French word meaning without. So without serifs or fancy little feet. So let me find you a sans serif font now. So this font does not have little feet on the edges of each character. So it is sans serif. There's nothing here. The character just ends. If I add these little red lines, it starts to look like a serif font though. All right, let's talk about typing on a path. Sometimes you want text to go in a certain direction that's more than just horizontal or vertical. In order to do something like that, we're going to create a path by using a shape. Over in my panels, we mostly so far have been working in our layers. We also have channels, which we haven't touched yet, and paths. I'm going to have you go ahead and click on paths. And while you have paths open, you're going to use your shape tool. I'm going to use a circle just because it's fairly simple to start with. If I hold down Shift, I can make a perfect circle. I'm going to change this so that my circle has no stroke and no fill. And then I'm going to go back to my layers panel. I'm going to click my type tool again, and I'm going to start to hover over that path that I've created or circle that I've created until you see my cursor change to a cursor with a wavy line going through it. So right now I have the proper cursor, right now I do not. So it's a little tricky, but I want to wait until my cursor looks just like this. And then I can click. And now I can type on a path. I'm letting my text type onto a path that I've created. I can come back over to my layers panel and I can hide the circle that I created so no one has to know that it's there. The last thing I want to show you is warped text, which can be really fun, although you have to be a little careful with this one because it can also look a little bit gimmicky. So I'm going to type hi everyone again. I know that I can highlight it. I can change the color. I can change the size. And I can change the font. I'm going to grab my text tool and highlight this font. And in my options menu or options bar, you'll see a T with a curve underneath it. I'm going to click on that and I have the option now to change the style of the warp. So I can arch it, I can have a bulge, I can have a flag or a wave or a fish. So let's see arch. I can now adjust the arch. I can make it bigger or smaller. I can change it horizontally. I can change it vertically. A little too far. And so I can achieve some really interesting effects using the warped text. You have to be a little careful though because it can seem a little bit kitschy if you use it too much. So to review, we have lots of different ways that you can manipulate text in Photoshop. We talked about leading, which was changing the space between lines, tracking, which was changing the space between all characters, kerning, which is changing the space between two characters. We looked at the difference between a serif and a sans serif font, how to type on a path, and how to warp your text. Hopefully you found this helpful. Can't wait to see what you create.